You all for being here tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time to come out. We got 14 days. So 14 days now from tonight till the primary. And I will tell you that I have noticed significantly over the last week in being here, everybody raising their level of seriousness. And I don't mean us. I don't mean the candidates. I mean you. I could tell as people come to town halls now, they are in the process of making a decision. If they haven't decided already, they know it's time to decide. And they know how important it is. And, you know, I hate when politicians say, this is the most important election of our lifetime. Because they always say it, and it never is. And the reason I know it never is because we'll have another one. We'll have another one in 4 years, another one 4 years after that. And it's not the most important election of our lifetime. But what it is an important moment in the history of our country in terms of what kind of country we want to be. You know, when I decided to get into this race back in June, I got in because I was so worried that no one was going to tell the truth. That our party had been cowed into a place where people were just going to repeat the lines that were given to them over and over and over again, and they weren't going to tell all of you what you needed to hear. They were going to try to figure out what you wanted to hear or what you were willing to hear and just give you that much and keep the rest of it for the back rooms where they all, by the way, say it to each other. But they want to continue to try to fool you. And I just said, I'm not going to stand by and allow this to happen because you deserve to hear the truth. You're entitled to hear the truth. And we should be treating you like the adults that you are, to hear everything and make your own judgments. Doesn't mean you're always going to agree with whatever I say or someone else in this race says. But what it does mean is that at least you can make those decisions based upon knowing everything you need to know. And it's an important election because it's about the soul of our party and the soul of our country. You will talk about a lot of issues tonight. And one of the great things that I love about doing these town halls is that I know you will bring up a lot of really important issues. And I'm anxious for that. But I will tell you what I think the single most important issue is in this race, if you're worried about the soul of our party and the soul of our country, and it's character. You know, like you see it today as we were riding up here from Manchester, I was watching on my phone the White House today, like tying themselves in knots, trying to explain how the Secretary of Defense went to the hospital, had prostate surgery, went under anesthesia, passed the power of the Secretary of Defense over to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, then got a urinary tract infection, which often happens after prostate surgery, went back in the hospital, and the entire time the President of the United States didn't know. Nobody told him. I mean, how the hell does that happen? Right? I mean, yeah, so top secret, you can't even tell the commander-in-chief. Point is that, like, what's the character of the Secretary of Defense? When he doesn't pick up the phone himself and call the president, the man who gave him the job, and say to him, by the way, Mr. President, bad news, I have prostate cancer. I need to go in for surgery. Here's how I propose to handle it. Is that okay with you? I mean, that seems to be pretty basic, right? You would do that with your own boss at your own job, and you don't have the largest military in the history of the world under your control. But you'd call your boss and tell your boss what's going on. Character. And it applies to our party too. You know, it was stunning to me when I saw Donald Trump's social media post on Christmas where he said in that post, to all the people who don't agree with me, rotten hell, Merry Christmas. He's right after that, he said, and by the way, Merry Christmas. Because those always go together, right? The combination of rotten hell and Merry Christmas often go together. Like his Thanksgiving post when he posted at 2:03 in the morning, here's what I'm thankful for, all the people that I hate. And then he listed all the people at that moment that he hated at 2:03 in the morning on social media. If Mary Pat woke up at 2:03 in the morning, because Mary Pat's here and she sleeps through anything. I want to tell you, after being with her for 40 years, I can tell you she sleeps through anything. If she woke up for some reason at 2 o'clock in the morning and just saw me on my phone, she'd throw something at me. If she saw me on my phone sending out a social media post, I'd get in even more trouble. And then if she read the social media post and it said, I'm thankful for all the people that I hate, she would look and say, like, who am I married to? It's head shaking. But that's who wants to go back to the Oval Office. He went to court today, which is the place he spends more time in than actually Iowa or New Hampshire. And afterwards, his argument is that a president is immune from the law. His lawyer in court today said that the president couldn't be prosecuted for sending SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political adversary of his inside the country unless he were first impeached and convicted by the House and the Senate. But if they didn't do it, then he could not be criminally prosecuted for sending the American military to kill a political opponent of his. And Trump, after the hearing, said he agreed with that. Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy about the possibility of him becoming president again, doesn't it? That he thinks he could do that, not only thinks he could do it, but that he could get away with it and not be subject to crime. I mean, look, who do we want to be? It is not necessarily enjoyable for me to be coming out all the time and pointing these things out to people and saying the obvious, but it is my job as a leader to do it. It is my job to remind you that we deserve better than that. We deserve better than the absent-minded guy in the White House that doesn't even know when his Secretary of Defense is in the hospital, and he would hire somebody who would actually not tell him that he was going to the hospital. And we deserve better than a guy who only wants to talk to us about what he can get away with, who he hates, who should rot in hell. Look, this country is angry and divided, but it's angry and divided because we've had angry and divisive leaders. I saw some polling today that said that Americans have never been less optimistic about the future of the country in the history of polling. Why do you think that is? It's because we've had leaders who are not optimistic about America's future. Because we've had leaders who want to be angry and divided. Because we've had leaders who make us feel like that's the right way to go. It's not. And we look at what's happening at the border and the unbelievable number of people trying to rush over that border. And it should tell us two things. One, about how incompetent our government is, and that is that they can't stop it. They can't control it in any way. And by the way, that was a failure of the Trump administration just as much as the Biden administration. You'd be interested to know that it's only in the month of December of this year that more people have crossed the border in any month in the Biden administration than did in the Trump administration. The average has been the same in both administrations. They both have failed. But the other thing it should tell you should give us some reason for optimism. People still want to come here. People are walking hundreds, if not thousands of miles from Central America through Mexico to get here. And we forget that. We forget how lucky we are, how fortunate we are, and what we contribute to making this the greatest country the world's ever known, and still the greatest beacon of hope for people around the world, for what their lives could be if they had our freedom, our liberty, our wealth, our education. And yet, all we have are political people who continue to tell us how bad everything is and how angry we should be. Because when we get angry, they think we'll react to and relate to the most angry voice in the room, which is Donald Trump. Look, the biggest difference between the 2016 race that I was in up here and the 2024 race that I'm in now is that in 2016, Donald Trump said, "I am your voice." And a lot of people thought he was. A lot of people voted for him for that reason. In 2024, he says, "I am your retribution." I could tell you this, I don't want him to be my retribution. Because one, I don't know what the hell he would do in my name, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be in favor of it. And secondly, he isn't your retribution or mine. He's his own. And he wants to be president again so he can make sure he pardons himself. Now, this makes him no different than Nikki Haley, who has now said she'll pardon him too. Not a stitch of evidence has been presented to a jury. No judge has ruled on whether the evidence is fair or not. No jury has heard that evidence and made a decision of whether he's guilty or not. They haven't heard one person get on the stand and talk about what happened on January 6th and what Donald Trump was doing or not doing that day. Yet Nikki Haley's decided he's worthy of a pardon. This is the kind of pandering that you should not be willing to put up with. She's just out there saying it because she thinks that it'll make some voters who like Trump in some way more comfortable with her. That's not what we're looking for. That's not what we should stand up for, and we deserve much better than that. You know, when Nikki was up here trying to explain how the Civil War started, people say to me, "Well, it's not really fair, Chris, because, you know, you're not saying she's a racist, are you?" I said, "Absolutely not. She's not. I've known her for 13 years. There's not a racist bone in Nikki Haley's body." So some people say, "Well, are you criticizing her because you say she's stupid and she doesn't know how the Civil War started?" Absolutely not. In fact, I was the person on stage in the fourth debate who stood up there and defended her when Vivek Ramaswamy tried to say she had less brains than his 3-year-old son. I stood up there and said, "That's wrong." And I've known her. We disagree on some stuff, but she is a smart, competent, qualified woman. So if she's not a racist, and she's not stupid, and she's not, then why the heck wouldn't she say that slavery is what caused the Civil War? Because she has heard in the past that some people where she comes from in South Carolina are still fighting the war. She said the Civil War is about change versus tradition. What was that tradition exactly? Enslaving Africans who come to the United States in forced labor for generations? Now, it's right versus wrong. And she's so trained to say the least offensive thing to any one group that she just abandons the truth. Look, if she'll do it about that, like, what's next? What's next? I don't know. Because I wouldn't have picked that one up. I wouldn't have guessed that one's coming, that we're going to have a debate about the Civil War. Kind of thought that was settled. But apparently we're still, having some arguments about that one. You deserve better. You deserve a lot better than that. And so Look, in the end, there's a lot of important issues to discuss tonight, and I'm happy to discuss them. And unlike other town halls that you may have been to, get ready, because when you ask the question, I'm going to actually answer it. And I'm not going to answer it with a slogan or anything. I'm just going to really listen to your question. I'm going to answer it. And you may like the answer or not like the answer. I don't know. We'll see. But I'll usually be able to tell by the way you look. Just be ready as you start to get it. And you'll be able to tell by looking at Mary Pat whether she likes my answer or not, too. She's very expressive as well. So usually I could tell. But you're going to get an answer. And boy, I think that's what we deserve, isn't it? The stakes are high. And it's not the most important election in the history of the country, but it's important. And who the next president is going to be really important. And the last thing I'll say before taking your questions is, it's up to you. It's up to you. New Hampshire has such an important role all the time. And it's just as important, if not more important this time, especially when a former president is up here for the third time. Are you going to give it to him again? Because I will guarantee you this. He wins New Hampshire, he's going to be the nominee. Because, I don't really believe a whole lot of these polls in terms of, the exact numbers. But the newest one I saw from South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state, has Trump beating her by 29 points in her home state. So it's not like she's going to come out of here and go down there and do really well. Now, it's no shock because her lieutenant governor, who's now the governor of the state, I want you to think about that again. The man who was her lieutenant governor is endorsing Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham, who's the senior senator from her state, endorsed Donald Trump. Tim Scott, who was wandering around here for a while as a candidate for president, who she appointed to the United States Senate. She appointed him. Remember that. She appointed him. He's not endorsing her either. It's interesting. I can tell you this much. We wouldn't have that trouble in New Jersey. There'd be a lot of enthusiastic support in New Jersey for a former two-term governor. So if he wins here, don't expect South Carolina to save us. It's not going to happen. And so you all are the ones who are going to make the call here. Iowa has supported him before. And he won up here in New Hampshire in 2016. I remember. Are you really going to do that again? I'm here because I hope you don't. I hope you care about the soul of this country enough to say we deserve better, much better than what we're getting. And like I said, you won't always agree with me, but you'll always know exactly what I think, and I'll always tell you the truth. And when I make mistakes, I'll tell you I made them. And I'll ask for your forgiveness because I'm human and I make mistakes just like you do every day. And if you're here looking for the perfect candidate, I can invite you to leave now because I ain't it. But that's not what we should be looking for because you're the only person you agree with 100% of the time. And maybe. So I want to go to questions. Now we have some cameras here tonight, so they're going to want to hear you. And even though we're in rather small quarters here, we've got a microphone that'll come around so that they can make sure they pick up. Because if you ask me some really good question that they want to put on the news tonight, you don't want to miss your chance to be famous. So there'll be a microphone going around, and all I want you to do is ask me what you want to know. Ask me what you're concerned about. And I'll be happy to answer it for you. So I thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. And we will start off right there with that gentleman.
Thank you. I just wanted to say welcome to New Hampshire, and it's great to have an articulate candidate speaking to the group.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Here's a microphone for you.
Okay. Back in 2000.
If you want to repeat the thing about how articulate I am.
I will do that at the end of the question.
Excellent.
So, back in 2019, then President Trump authorized the transfer and sale of nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. Keep in mind, 15 of the 19 perpetrators of 9/11 were Saudi.
Yep.
What are your thoughts? A two-part question. What are your thoughts on this transfer of nuclear technology? I won't call Saudi Arabia a rogue nation, but certainly not a nation that I think espouses the values that we have in our country. And the second part, do you think there's any correlation between the $2 billion transfer to America's self-anointed crown prince and the transfer of that technology?
You would not be talking about Jared Kushner, would you?
We'll keep his name out of it.
Well, that hasn't worked too well for me over time, keeping the Kushner name out of it. All right, so let's start with the first part. This is the problem that you're confronted with when you don't deal with Iran. Right? So the Saudi argument to us is, you got to help us with some of this because Iran is developing a nuclear weapon and they hate us, meaning the Saudis, in addition to the U.S. And so you got to help us begin to develop that in case they get it so that we won't be too far behind. That's the argument. And the reason why that argument is such a bad argument is we should be against anyone else getting nuclear weapons. We got enough of a problem right now. We got that lunatic in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, who's got nuclear capability now and regularly threatening the United States and the west coast of the United States as he develops greater missile technology. You know, we can't continue to allow this nuclear genie to get further and further out of the bottle. And that's what he did in 2019. And he did it because he was failing with his efforts in Iran. If the Saudis thought he was succeeding in containing Iran and making sure Iran knew that the United States would do anything they needed to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, the Saudis would be much less concerned about this. And some people bring up the Israelis, but the Israelis have had nuclear technology for some time, and the Saudis haven't been demanding anything in return because the Saudis know that the Israelis are not going to use that in an aggressive way against the Saudis. They're just not. Israel, as we see currently, is worrying about surviving every day. They're not looking to conquer anybody else. They're looking to survive. So I think it was a bad decision. And I think it's just typical of Donald Trump's very transactional philosophy. Oh, I don't like that friend, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Not always. Sometimes they're just not a friend. And so I think on that front, I think it was a flawed decision. And I think what we should be spending much more of our time focused on is isolating Iran and saying to the Saudis, work with us to isolate Iran by supporting Israel. Because if the land where Islam was born signs a peace agreement with Israel, Iran's argument becomes much, much less potent in the Middle East. Right? Jordan has done it. Egypt has done it. The UAE has done it. Morocco has done it. We need to continue to add to that list so Iran is isolated. And then we go to Iran and say, stop the nuclear technology or we're going to take it out. This is about limiting nuclear technology, not expanding it so more people have it. And the point you made about 9/11 is very important because I wouldn't call the Saudi government a rogue government. I agree with you on that. But they have terrorist elements, radical Islamic terrorist elements inside their country that they're fighting against all the time. And sometimes they appease them to keep them at bay because they don't want, the tiger to eat them, right? So we know that there was a lot of financing for Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia that helped Osama bin Laden and the others to plan and execute the attacks on our country on 9/11. If they get that technology with our help, how do we know they won't give it to a terrorist organization? And that's got to be a large concern that gets added to the Iranian concern as well. That's for the last part. Look, can you imagine that Donald Trump's first foreign visit as president was to Saudi Arabia? I could tell you that's groundbreaking. Groundbreaking. Not to Great Britain, not to France, not to Mexico or Canada, not to any of our allies, but to a country that is not an ally of ours. May not be an enemy, but they're not an ally either. Who arranged for that first trip to Saudi Arabia? I can tell you, because I was there. Not in Saudi Arabia, but around at the time. It was Jared Kushner. And Jared Kushner, for those of you who don't recall, is married to Ivanka Trump. Further history lesson briefly, Jared Kushner's not a huge fan of mine because when I was U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, prosecuted his father and sent him to jail. Who knew he was going to marry Donald Trump's daughter? You know, that was years later. But I would have done it anyway because his father was guilty of some awful, awful crimes. And you're right. Then 6 months after he was out of the White House, he's given $2 billion by the Saudi private investment fund to manage for them. Up until just a few months ago, and that happened, so as we know, nearly 3 years ago, up till a few months ago, he had not invested any of the money, but was getting paid a handsome management fee on the $2 billion. You know, I thought that we fought a revolution to not have a royal family. But Donald Trump sees his family as the royal family. And, you know, I remember during the time at the White House, Jared and Ivanka averaged making between $40 and $50 million a year while they were there on volunteer service in the White House. Can't imagine that they were using that position to leverage anybody to make money outside of it, right? That would be horribly cynical of me to think, given the background, which both families are such law-abiding people, that I can't imagine that they wouldn't abide by the law. I mean, this is what we're ready to get back again, because if you think Jared and Ivanka are not going back to the White House, you're nuts. They're low-key right now. They're hiding down in Florida because they don't want to be associated with his craziness. But once they're playing Hail to the Chief for him, they'll be right back there because there'll be another way to make more money. And that is something that should be repugnant to everybody. So that's where I stand on the transfer of technology, and that's where I stand on these families. And by the way, let's be fair. Hunter Biden is just a lower level crook. That's the fact. I mean, he's been trading on his family name for years with very little apparent expertise in anything, or at least not anything that you could really monetize. Apparently seems to be an expert in a number of things from what we saw on his laptop, but none of that is usually ways you can make money. And his father's allowing him to do that too. You wonder, don't you? If these two guys can't control their own family, how the hell are they going to run the country? You know, if you can't look at your own family and say to them, you don't make money off of my presidency, or in Joe Biden's case, his vice presidency. Not allowed. If I find out you're doing it, I'm going to put a stop to it. Instead, Joe Biden did the exact opposite. He was on the phone with his clients, making them feel good about old Hunter. And by the way, that's not to mention also his brother Jim, who's a lobbyist, and his sister Valerie, who's a lobbyist. So we have the two frontrunners in this race who not only are a combined 160 years old, let's not forget that for a second. You know, my kids tell me that when I raised this, and my children, I'm sure, are watching on the live stream, so I'm going to get yelled at again. But they say when I raise this, it makes me an ageist. Now, I had to look that up to find out what it was. It's bad. But I'm like, once I knew what it was, I'm like, yes, I plead guilty. I don't think that an 82-year-old person should be president of the United States. I just think it's too old. There are other things that 82-year-old people can do just fine. My dad's watching tonight. He's 90. He still drives. He works out 6 days a week at 90. And best yet, he's dating a 74-year-old woman. It gives hope to every man in this audience. My father gives you hope. All right? But I tell you this, he got no business being president of the United States. And so everyone ages at different paces and different levels. But here we've got these two guys at that age, can't control their own family. They're all making money off everybody. We can do better. And we should demand better than that, much better. Next question. Yes, sir. Here.
Oh. First of all, thank you for coming to the great city of Rochester. We appreciate it, everyone here. And secondly, we all know the Social Security program is broke or pretty close to being broken, and rumors out there in 2034 we're going to be just about dry. What is your plan to make it vibrant and solid again?
Really important question, and this is one where I'll give Nikki credit, because Nikki and I are the only two people talking about this issue. If you remember the debate 2 debates ago, DeSantis, Tim Scott, and Ramaswamy all said, it'll fix itself, don't worry. That means that they know that fixing it is going to cause some pain, and they don't want to say that, and so they're unwilling to say it. I'm willing to say it because it's the truth. In 10 years, you are right. In 10 years, it will be broke, and it will, by law, require a 24% reduction in everyone's monthly Social Security benefit. So think about that if you're on Social Security and rely upon it to help to support you. If the check that got wired to you next month was 24% less than what it was the month before. For lots of Americans, this would be a disaster. And have them having to choose between food and shelter, heat. I mean, awful choices. So we can't let that happen. So what do we have to do? There are only 3 elements to the Social Security program. It's really a pretty easy program. It's when do you become eligible? When? Second, is everybody eligible? And third, how much tax is put into it? When Social Security started, you had 14 workers for every recipient. Now you have 2. So that's the first thing that's a problem. So what do we do about it? First off, I would raise the retirement age. But I would raise the retirement age not for people in their 50s or 60s, but for people in their 30s and 40s who will have plenty of time to adjust to this new retirement age. You can't do it to people who only have 5 or 10 years till they retire. They will not have enough time to prepare for that, to save more money and put it aside so they can support themselves. But look, Mary Pat and I, our oldest child is 30. We have a 30-year-old son. If we raise the retirement age 3 or 4 years, and he's got 40 years to get ready for that, and he doesn't, we got bigger problems than the Social Security retirement age with our 30-year-old son. We'll give people plenty of notice to get ready, but we got to raise the retirement age. And if we do, why do we do it? It reflects reality. When Social Security started, the average life expectancy of a man in the United States was 63 years old. And when it started, you could start collecting Social Security at 62. Great deal for the government, right? Pay all this money in while you're working, and the average person would collect it for a year and then die. And so that's why the trust fund used to be so flush. It was about the number of workers paying in and the fact that very few people were taking it out for a long period of time. Now, the average man in this country lives to 83, not 63. So if you have people who are retiring at 65, 66, 67, they're now collecting this on average for 18 years. And it's just, the money is not there to do that. Second, I would change eligibility for Social Security and not make everybody eligible. I would do a means test on Social Security. This country has provided all of us with a lot of great opportunities. And for those of us who have been fortunate enough to make the most of those opportunities and be able to save a lot for our retirement, we shouldn't get Social Security. Social Security was a safety net program. That's why it was set up. It was set up after the Depression by FDR because everyone relied upon private pensions back then from the company they worked for. And when all those companies went out of business in the Great Depression, people were left to age in poverty. And Roosevelt, I think, rightly said, we can't allow that. There should be a safety net underneath it so that people can have at least enough to live on. That's what it was intended for. I got to tell you the truth. Warren Buffett doesn't need Social Security. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't need Social Security, right? Elon Musk, no Social Security for you. Yes, I've heard from people in town hall meetings, I paid into it, I want my money back. Well, look, there are lots of programs that we pay for with our taxes every day that we never get a benefit from. The example I use all the time, Mary Pat and I have been fortunate, we've never had to be on food stamps. So, but we pay for food stamps in our taxes every year. It's good to know that in this country, we want to try to make sure as best we can that people don't go to bed hungry at night in this country, and that food stamps are there to help mothers, fathers, children to be able to support themselves. That's the way we need to, I think, look at Social Security going forward. That it is there for those people who need it the most, and we are helping to pay for that. And I'm not talking about, you know, people have $500,000 and most of it's tied up in their house. I'm talking about people who've been able to save millions of dollars for their retirement. And if you've been able to save millions of dollars for your retirement, God bless, that's great. Great job on your part. Your life is going to be really good. But you got to wonder, do you need Social Security then? And isn't it really there for the people who need it the most? I think if we make those two changes, you can make it solvent for the long term without having to raise taxes again on people. Because people say, well, why not lift the cap on Social Security taxes? The problem is that if you lift the cap, a lot of middle-class families are going to be paying a lot higher taxes. And you just stop them from saving for their own retirement. I'd rather have those people not give the money to the government who stole it from the trust fund and spent it on other stuff, right? Which is why we're in the problem we're in. Let them say now, we're not going to raise the taxes, but the deal is you need to go and save for your own retirement. Make sure you have that money there. And if you do that, you're not going to have to worry about what happens with Social Security. So that's why I would be opposed to increasing the tax on it, because I think the government has shown themselves not to be responsible stewards of that money that was supposed to be in a trust fund and is no longer there because it's all been given to the general fund. And now it's all just dead anyway. I mean, all it is treasury bills, right? It's not real money anymore in there. We're outspending how much we collect by a lot and just borrowing against it. So that's the way I would handle Social Security. I think the next president's gonna, well, if the next president has 8 years, if it's not either Trump or Biden, they're gonna have to deal with it because of the 10-year issue. That's another problem with Trump or Biden. They only got 4 years. Remember, Biden got up at his State of the Union address last year and he said, can we all agree we're not gonna touch Social Security? And both sides of the chamber, for the only time all night, both sides got up and cheered. I turned to Mary Pat and I said, a room full of liars and hypocrites. Like, they know, and all they want is like, God, don't make me make that vote, right? But the next president, if it's someone who's eligible for 2 terms, is going to have to deal with it. And so I'm happy to deal with it. I'm running for president because I want to do the big things, not the small things. There are big problems in this country that need to be fixed. I want to go fix the big problems and then go home. I'm not looking to stay forever. Let me see. Yes, sir, in the back.
Welcome, Governor Christie. We appreciate it. My question to you, and you had started off this town hall by saying it's time to get serious, and it is time to get serious. And we all in this room want our vote to count and to matter. And hypothetically speaking, we all go out in 2 weeks and we vote for you. And the next morning, we see that you got 20% of the vote, and Nikki Haley gets 30% of the vote, and Donald Trump gets 40% of the vote, to keep the math simple.
Sure.
Trump wins New Hampshire, and I agree with you. If Trump wins New Hampshire, he wins the nomination. What do you say to the voters not supporting Trump around the unification of a vote to ensure that Trump does not win New Hampshire?
Look, I think part of the problem is I would be happy to get out of the way for someone who is actually running against Donald Trump. Like, look, I've said from the beginning that if I didn't see a path to winning, that I would get out. Now, part of that is because I want Trump to lose, but part of it too is this is hard. This is hard, and you don't want to do this if you don't see any. Like, look, I'm famous enough. Let's start with that. There's not a place I can walk in this country where people don't recognize who I am. I got plenty of titles. The only reason to do this is to win. So I'd be happy to get out of the way for somebody if they actually were going against Donald Trump. But like, I listened to Nikki, and let's start off with this. She got asked this again yesterday in Iowa. Voter said, I'm trying to make my decision about who to vote for. I'm against Donald Trump. Will you promise me that you won't accept the vice presidency from Donald Trump if he offers it? And she once again refused to answer the question. Now, I've said very clearly, if Donald Trump offers me vice president, it's a hard no. Give Ron DeSantis credit. They asked Ron. Ron said not only would he say no to Trump, he'd also say no to Nikki. He has no interest in being vice president for anybody. And, you know, that's probably consistent with his personality, but nonetheless, at least he answered the question when he was asked. Let me tell you something, having been in this business at a national level now for 15 years and being vetted twice for vice president. I was vetted by Mitt Romney for vice president in 2012. I was down to the last two for Donald Trump in 2016. It was me or Mike Pence. Thank God he picked Pence. I think Pence is wishing he would have picked me. And so I've been through this. When a politician doesn't say they won't take it, that means they will. So she says cute things like, I never play for second, in response to that question. Okay, I get it, but does that mean you won't take it? I know you're not playing for it. Does that mean you wouldn't take it? Won't answer the question. Says she'd pardon him. Remember the first debate back in August? Seems like a long time ago in Milwaukee. But the first debate, we were all asked, if he's a convicted felon, would you vote for him? She raised her hand and has not backed off from that since. The only two people on the stage at that time who didn't raise their hands were me and Asa Hutchinson. That was it. DeSantis, Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, Nikki Haley, they all raised their hands. She says she'll pardon him, as I mentioned before. She says he was the right president for the right time. And then she says, for some reason, chaos and drama follow him wherever he goes. That's like the arsonist saying, for some reason, burning buildings follow me wherever I go. I know why. You set the fire. Chaos and drama follow him because that's what he creates by his personal conduct. So my answer to you is, I have no interest in being a spoiler for someone who wants to beat Donald Trump. But if you're willing to be his vice president, if you'd pardon him if you became president, if you'd vote for him even if he was a convicted felon, which I assume means that if she doesn't beat him, she'll endorse him. I mean, geez, really? Should the people who are opposed to Donald Trump lose any voice to have someone oppose them? And why do we think she'd beat him? Like, she's not trying to beat him. She's hoping that lightning strikes. But how do you beat somebody if you won't say why they don't belong being president? I'm making it really clear he's unfit. He is unfit to be president of the United States. She won't say that. In fact, she says the opposite. She says he's fit to be president. Listen to this guy for 5 minutes. And here's the worst part. She knows it. She knows it. The last piece I'll tell you is this. She's not playing for 2024. If lightning strikes, yeah, I like that. You can yell that. When you want to agree with me, yell out anytime you like. She's not playing for 2024. If lightning strikes and she gets in 2024, she'd be really happy. She's playing for 2028. And she knows that in 2028, Donald Trump will be gone in one respect or another. He can only serve one more term as president, so if he were elected president, he has to leave. I mean, they'll have to get, like, police to remove him, but he'll have to leave. Or if he loses, I think even he probably will get the joke at that point. He won't admit he lost, but he'll say that it got stolen from him a second time, and I don't think he comes back again in 2028. So why then? What do I mean? She doesn't want to anger people who support Trump and hopes that in 2 or 3 years, when we're back around to this process again, the people who support Trump say, oh, well, she wasn't that bad. I mean, yeah, she ran against him, but she didn't say anything bad about him. And she said she would pardon him and she'd support him and she would have been his vice president. Like, I get this, right? Yeah, it does sound like politics, and it's the worst kind of politics. And so, you know, I got into this to defeat him and become president. And if I believe I have a path to doing that, then I'm going to stay in this race no matter what Nikki Haley says. And if I don't, I won't. Right? And I'll make that decision on my own, regardless of her and whatever the poll numbers of the moment are. Because you know, with 2 weeks to go in New Hampshire, anything could change in this race as people start to focus and make their decisions. So it's kind of hard to make those decisions purely based upon poll numbers. So that's where I feel about it. And you know, I just believe that we need to stand for certain things. And if there was someone else, anyone else in this race who'd been willing to take him on, I'd be happy to work with that person to try to get done what you just mentioned. But I'll end with this. Let's say I dropped out of the race right now and I supported Nikki Haley. And then 3 months from now, 4 months from now, when we get ready to go to the convention, she comes out and is his vice president. What will I look like? What will all the people who supported her at my behest look like when she's up on a stage in Milwaukee with her hands up like this with Donald Trump? And until she says publicly that that's not a possibility, you got to believe it is. And I made that mistake once, 8 years ago. I made an endorsement decision based on politics 8 years ago when I supported Trump. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. Can't do it. But thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Yes, young lady.
I'm learning about St. Monica and her hope. What is your biggest hope for our country?
And what's your name? Isabel. How old are you? All right, Isabel. First of all, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate that. My biggest hope for our country is that we get together and remember once again why we're so lucky to be Americans and work together. We haven't worked together for a long time. We've been working against each other. We haven't worked together. And this country is only going to continue to grow and be the kind of place that it was for me when I was 8 years old if we do that. And so my biggest hope for the country is that we get over all this anger and division, that we start to work together again. Because if we work together again, no country can beat America. If we work together, you're going to be able to have the greatest future of any generation. And you'll be able to do whatever you want to do and be whoever you want to be. But only if we give you the chance in a country that isn't always fighting with each other, but is willing to find things that we can work together on and do that to make the country better for you. So that's my biggest hope for the country is I've already had a really great life. As you could tell, I'm old. And I'm 61 years old now, and you probably can't even imagine what it would be like to be that age. But my life's already been really great. I've had a great American life, and I want you, when you get to be 61 years old, to be able to say you've had a great American life too. And that's my biggest hope for our country. And it's great. It's so encouraging that you're here tonight and that you have the courage to raise your hand to get up and ask a question. And you know what that tells me? We'd be good with you. You're going to be okay. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I can't stand watching the news every night because of this migration of folks coming from South America and Central America. Is there a policy that we can institute in those countries and below the or close to the equator or below the equator that can cut that down?
Yeah, I think there is. I think first we got to take care of business inside our own country, right? Because right now they believe, and we've given them no reason not to, that if they come, they're getting over. Right? So if you're in a place like Ecuador and you are feeling like you're politically repressed or you're economically really poor, and you hear about relatives of yours who have come to America and they're living a good life, you're going to be drawn to come, especially if you think if you get there, they're going to let you over the border. So that's why we have to fix ourselves and our own problems first. So here's what I would do. I have 5 things I would do to fix the problem at the border. First, on my first day as president, I would sign an executive order that sent the National Guard to the border. The National Guard is there to protect inside this country. That's why it's called the National Guard, to protect the nation. Send them to the border because right now, our Customs and Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed. Last month, 276,000 attempted illegal crossings. The men and women in that Customs and Border Patrol can't keep up, so they need help. So I'd send National Guard to the border to turn people away who try to come over here illegally. Second, we need to hire 10,000 new Customs and Border Patrol officers because they're overwhelmed. Now, that'll take us a year to recruit them, train them, and deploy them. So that's why you have to keep the National Guard down there probably for at least a year until you get the new people in. But you get those people in to continue to do the job and not be overwhelmed. Third, I would absolutely make sure that we have enough detention beds down there once we apprehend people to detain them. You know right now how many detention beds we have at the border? 38,000. We had 276,000 attempted crossings last month, right? So even if we detain them, we got no place to put them. I would double the number of beds to 80,000. That would probably take 9 months to a year as well. But you need to do that because we need to detain people at the border because, you know, right now the policy is you capture them if they're coming across, if you capture them, and you release them into the country, which gets to point 4. We need to triple the number of immigration judges. Right now, if we capture people, right, and they claim political asylum, then they're entitled to a hearing. You know how long they have to wait for a hearing now? 4 years. 4 years. Well, you can't detain them for 4 years. So what do? We release them into the country and say, hey, come back here in 4 years to El Paso and have a hearing which could result in you being removed. They're not stupid. They're not coming back. And we have this huge continental country and they disappear into it and we can't possibly keep track of all of them, right? So if we triple the number of immigration judges, we can bring that waiting period from 4 years to below a year. And you can detain them for less than a year. Keep them there in the detention beds we talked about. Give them their hearing. If they qualify for political asylum under our laws, you bring them in legally. If they don't, you send them home. Fifth, go ahead. I'll get to that. I said we'll fix home first, and then we'll go over there, but I'll get to it. So fifth, we need to change the immigration laws here because the immigration laws we have now are antiquated, and they encourage people to come illegally because they have to wait so long to get in here legally. So they say, well, the hell with that. Well, I'm not going to wait, and I don't even know if I'm going to get in. We have 6 million vacant jobs in this country right now. 6 million vacant jobs in this economy. What we've done throughout our whole history, as you know, is when we've had vacant jobs that Americans either couldn't do or didn't want to do, we brought in immigrants. And we said, okay, you get a work visa, you come in, you work, and if you want to become a citizen eventually, you pay your taxes, you follow the law, and you learn the language. If you do all those things, then you get in line to become a citizen. But in the meantime, you can stay here and work and pay taxes and do the jobs that Americans aren't doing. We don't do that. We need a merit-based immigration system that says, okay, here where we have the open jobs, the industries that we do, who's got skills to be able to do that? That's the way my great-grandfather got here. My great-grandfather in 1901 came here from Sicily. He's a stonemason. And they were building New York City. And so they said, any Masons who want to come, we'll take you. And so my great-grandfather and great-grandmother got their ticket. The problem was when they got their ticket, my great-grandmother was 9 months pregnant. So my great-grandfather said, I'll go. You have the baby and then meet me. My great-grandmother was a really smart woman. She was like, no shot, buddy. I'm coming with you. And she gave birth to my grandfather on the boat on the way over to the United States. And my grandfather was one who told me these stories. And he said to me, the proudest day of his life is the day that he'll never remember. He was 4 days old when they got to Ellis Island. And when he got there, they made him an American citizen. We can't lose those stories. It's part of what makes us who we are. And so we need to fix those things. We need to get E-Verify so that employers know that they're hiring someone, that they're here legally, they have a work visa to be able to be here. But to do that, we're going to have to give the Democrats something because they don't want merit-based immigration and they don't want E-Verify. So I don't know what it's going to be. Is it going to have to be, path to citizenship for some people? Is it going to have to be for dreamers, some type of accommodation? But that's what we have to do because no one's going to be in complete control. We don't have a dictator. So we need 60 votes in the Senate to get anything. So you have to entice Democrats to do something. That's what I did for 8 years as governor of New Jersey. New Jersey's a Democratic state. We have 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. I had a Democratic legislature every day of my governorship. I had to learn how to coax, punch, coerce, hug, cuddle, whisper, and get a deal made, or else I would wind up doing nothing. We haven't had a president who's known how to do that for over 20 years. George W. Bush was the last one who knew how to do that because he had a Democratic Senate down in Texas and had to make deals. We haven't had a president who's been willing to do that on either side of the aisle since then. I'll get that done. Now, on the other countries, we have enormous trade with all of those countries, and we have to use that as a leverage with them. We have to say, look, we're going to continue to trade with you. We want to continue to trade with you and help your economy, but you've got to exert some control over your population. You can't just say, because you know what they're doing now. Go. Not our problem anymore. It's going to be America's problem. The biggest weapon we have is trade. And we have to use it to convince them, Mexico most importantly, because remember, Mexico is our single biggest trading partner in the world. And they need us. And we've got to say to the president of Mexico, because the current president, the last president was somewhat cooperative. The current one is not cooperative at all. Now, he's leaving next year. We'll see who the new person is. But whoever that new person is, we have to make sure they understand they've got to become part of the solution and not just be a highway. They treat Mexico like it's a highway for them to just go through to get there. Mexico could do a lot more than what they're doing. We need to start with them and then work our way south to the other Central American countries, which is where most of these folks are coming from, and say to them, because Mexico's economy is really pretty good. So we don't have a lot of Mexicans coming. It's mostly other Central Americans, Colombians, Ecuadorians. All those folks are, dead Nicaraguans are coming up here because the economies in those countries, mostly socialist, are bad, and they want to come here. So the way to do it, I think, is through trade. Because, look, Ron DeSantis says he wants to shoot him stone cold dead at the border. Which person's actually going to do that, right? He's going to pull that trigger and kill somebody innocently, right? Nikki Haley says she's going to end all trade with those people. Well, wait to see what that does to our economy, too, right? This is TV tough guy talk. What I just told you is a practical way to get this done. And that's the way we have to do it. And it won't make your heart pound fast. And if you want retribution, I'm not the retribution guy on this issue. I'm the one who wants to get it fixed. Because here's the last piece. If we don't get it fixed, someone's going to come over that border that's a terrorist. We had 200 people in the last 4 months who have come over the border, or tried to come over the border, who are on the terror watch list. And we caught them. But the day's going to come when we don't, if it hasn't already. And then we're going to wind up getting attacked here by those people on our own soil because we couldn't close our border. So that's the way I would do it, and balance those two things. But we got to get our own house in order. And if we do, I think we'll stop most of it. And then we can use trade to stop the rest of it. And that's the way I would go about it. It's a complicated problem, but it's one that can be fixed. But you got to be willing to work with the other side, too, because we need to pass laws that can make the immigration system fairer and better in this country. And then we can help fill those jobs, too, which would help our economy grow significantly, and that would be good for everybody. All right, other questions for anybody? Yes, sir, in the back. She's coming around. Molly is coming.
Thank you, Governor. I'm a former New Jersey resident myself, and happy to be here in New Hampshire with you. My question is to follow up on the South America issue. At Drew, I studied Latin American international relations. and the Chinese development and investment in these countries. And the question that was asked to Mitt Romney, who was the greatest American international obstacle or opponent, and he gave an answer. I was curious to see who you think is America's greatest country that is a threat to us. And what do you think about Chinese interest in development and investment in third world countries to take over their minerals and resources and to diminish American influence?
Yeah, this answer is pretty easy. This is almost as easy as what caused the Civil War. China is our greatest adversary. And the reason China is our greatest adversary is threefold. One, and this is consistent with what Romney said in 12 about Russia, they are a communist dictatorship. And so philosophically, about the way society should be ordered, we completely disagree. Secondly, they are the number 2 economy in the world. And as the number 2 economy in the world, they actually have the resources to be an able adversary. And number 3, they don't want to just compete with us, they want to defeat us. And that's a much different approach. So those 3 reasons are why they're our biggest adversary. The second point on the issue of their economic strength, that's what they've been able to use, as you talked about it, both in Africa and in South America, to invest in what they call the Belt and Roadway program, right? To invest, and in return, they get control of a number of elements of those countries' natural resources. And that matters not only because we don't want them in control of it, it limits our access to those things as well, which are integral to the creation of semiconductors, integral to the creation of batteries, integral creation of a lot of things that we want to do in this country. Those minerals are not here. It's one of the few times that this country doesn't have the natural resource advantage. One of our great advantages over the history of our country has been we've been relatively self-contained in terms of natural resources. And now with the way we've developed energy, we're pretty self-contained with that as well. But on some of these other ones, we are not, as you know. And so the Chinese understand that, and that's why they've gone about doing it. They want to control it, and they want to deprive it from us. It's a twofer for them. And so what do we need to do in response to that? I think that this is what all the people in our party say they oppose foreign aid. The Chinese love it. Every time a Republican gets up in Congress and says, this is a wasteful foreign aid, the Chinese are like, amen, baby, keep saying it. And we'll do it. And they can't get any friends naturally. They got to buy all their friends, right? We've been lucky enough that over time, because philosophically we've been in line with most of the rest of the world in terms of the way people want to live, we've been able to have friends without having to buy them. Well, there's some of these folks that have now shown themselves they're for sale. And we got to go in and compete with the Chinese on this stuff. Remember, too, on the first part, on the communist dictator part, this is something Trump just said this a couple days ago. Loves President Xi because he rules 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. That used to be what the American president used to speak against. Now we got an American president who sounds jealous that he can't be a dictator like President Xi. It's breathtaking. And I will tell you, I've spoken to Trump supporters up here in New Hampshire about this. And when you say that to them, like for most of them, not all of them, but for most of them, they kind of get like an ashamed look on their face. And you know what they say to me in return? Well, he doesn't really mean it. Whenever Trump says something that really repels a Trump supporter, they say either one of two things. Either it's not true, because he told me it's not, or he didn't really mean it. He means it. And so we need, as a country, to be standing strong against folks like Xi, Kim Jong-un, the mullahs in Iran. We need to be standing strong against these guys, Putin in Russia, because the rest of the world is watching. And those friendships that we have, they're going to go away. And if they think that we're not going to stand strong against China, they'll put a for sale sign up in front of them as well. And if China's willing to pay, they're willing to pay. Now, the last thing to give some hope to this conversation, as my friend over here wants a little hope, we're going to give you some, okay? News statistics just came out in the last 2 weeks. China's GDP for last year is 2/3 of ours. 2/3. They are going like this. Why? Because they had that one-child policy for a long, long time, and their folks are aging, and they don't have a labor force to support it. Secondly, they spent a ton of money not only on the Belt and Roadway program, but inside their own place, building cities, thinking the population was going to expand, and no one's living there. They have entire cities in China, office buildings, apartment buildings that are vacant. No one is living there. They have a huge debt because of that, and they're now struggling with that. And third, they help to create a middle class in China. And when people start to develop middle class, they get middle class values, which means like they want to speak out. They want to pick their own leaders. And the communist dictator is like, no. We're just going to give you some money, stay cool. We don't need you speaking about us. We're in charge here. So there are moments right now where if you have an aggressive American president who knows how to negotiate, we can leverage them right now because their economic advantage that they had for probably the last 15 years, it turns out quickly they were growing, is now going this way. They need us now more than we need them. And President Xi didn't come to San Francisco a month or so ago because he wanted to see the Golden Gate Bridge, right? He came to San Francisco because American businessmen and women were there, and he wanted to encourage them to invest more in China. Well, we should stop them from doing that unless he's going to start to cooperate with us on the things that we just talked about. So that's the way I would go about it. Yes, ma'am. Does that sweatshirt say Ramapo? Yeah, man. That's some Jersey stuff there. All right, go ahead, Molly.
Okay, I'm not very good at this.
Oh,
So-
just relax. It's all good.
How can we fix the problem so no other women have to go through what a couple of women have been going through lately, where they've been forced to carry a non-viable pregnancy to term? Is it going to be that just women stop living in those states? Because that's going to be really weird.
Yeah.
I have a 19-year-old daughter, and I don't want her to ever have to go through that.
No, look, I completely agree with you. And I agree with you as someone who is personally pro-life. But when I look at what happened in Texas, right, that's not protecting a life. It is contrary to the pro-life philosophy. The pro-life philosophy says we want to protect every life. Well, the doctors made very clear to this woman that her child was either going to be stillborn or was going to die within hours of birth. Yet they wanted to force her to carry that pregnancy for another 20 weeks, which is a horrible thing to know that the life that you feel inside of you is not going to be born and have to do that. So it's wrong. And so my view on that is that if laws are going to be pro-life, they have to be to preserve an actual life. So that's on that piece of it. But secondly, on this issue, this is why every state should be allowed to decide for themselves. Now, I believe the voters should make this decision, not the legislatures. This should not be a group of elected officials who make this decision. This should be put up to a vote in every state and let people decide. And then at least you know that you have a voice in this. And so, like, for instance, look at what's happening in Florida right now. So Ron DeSantis signed a 6-week abortion ban when he's getting ready to run for president because he thought, I guess, it was going to make him more likely to become president. What's happened? In Florida, which is a red state now, they got enough signatures to put protecting a woman's right to make those decisions on the ballot for this November. Now, that's what I want to see happen all over the country. Let people decide. Now, Oklahoma had a vote. Oklahoma decided they only wanted to allow abortion in cases of threat to the life of the mother. I disagree with that, but at least the people voted for it. I don't want the Congress in Washington, D.C. making this decision, because let me tell you, you watch those jokers. It took them 3 weeks to figure out who the new speaker was going to be after they fired the old one, right? They held up 400 military promotions over this issue, right? We don't need them making those decisions. I would not sign any national abortion ban if I were president of the United States. I wouldn't. I don't think it should be that kind of issue. I trust the people of every state to make this decision. And when you see what's happening in the country, when Kansas voted to not ban abortion, one of the reddest states in this country, this is not a red or a blue issue. It just isn't. The politicians make it that way. Right? And by the way, and men have an interest in it too, right? I mean, like men have opinions on this. And often I've found that men's opinions are informed by the women in their lives. You know, it's not like we come up with this stuff most of the time by ourselves. And, you know, so that's why I'm okay with people making this decision at the ballot box. I think it's the only way to do it. It's a very emotional, very personal issue. You have to have laws on it. You can't have no law on it. So let's let people decide. I'm different in this race than Ron or Nikki. They both would sign national abortion bans. And, you know, now Nikki doesn't say that when she's in New Hampshire because she knows that's not incredibly popular here. So she waits to say that to when she's in Iowa in front of the evangelical crowd. Then she says she'd sign a 6-week abortion ban. When she's here, she says, I'm for compassion. Okay, I am too. I don't know what the hell that means, but generally I'm for compassion. Be careful about this stuff because, again, like with the vice presidency, when a politician won't answer the question, it means because they think you're not going to like their answer. I'm from New Jersey, as you know. I don't care whether you like my answer or not. What I care is that you hear it and that you know that when I give it, I mean it. And for people who were in New Jersey when I was governor, they know that's true. And so I will do what I think is the right thing and the best thing to do. And on this issue, I believe it's right for the people to decide at the ballot box so that everybody's voice can be heard. And that's the way I would deal with it. All right. Yes, ma'am. Right there.
Hi, my question is this. I think a lot of our nation, we talk about checks and balances. The largest court in the land right now has no checks and balances. They say that they've imposed their self-regulating list, but we know that that's not true, or we know that all of the justices aren't necessarily following those rules, right? We know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has declared in the past when she's received gifts and others haven't. And looks like there's some buying of decisions going on by some of the justices. What would you do to make sure that we clean that up so that it can't happen and so that they're not regulating themselves? Is there a way to fix that?
Well, let me say this. First off, you know, I think that transparency is the most important thing on that. And I really don't believe, I don't know all of them, but I know most of them. I don't believe anybody's buying decisions. I don't think that's happening. But it doesn't matter because if there's a perception that they're being bought, then it lowers their credibility. And the first thing I would do as president on this issue is I'd go to Chief Justice Roberts and I'd say to him, look, I don't want to do this, okay? I don't want to impose a law that Congress comes up with because I can't do it myself. Congress has to do it with the president's assent. So, and I don't trust them to not do it in a partisan way. So the first thing I do is call the Chief Justice over to the White House and I'd say, look, either you do it or I'll do it. I'd prefer you do it in a way that is public and transparent so that everybody can see it and that you have to file your disclosure forms the same way we have to and that the rules of filing those disclosure forms are just like the ones that I have to file so that the American people can go on the internet, look at who you're getting paid by, who's helping you write a book, who's sending you on a trip to Europe to give a speech. I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with that as long as we know. Because then if we see a decision that goes one way or the other, then we can raise a stink about it. So I would go to the Chief Justice first, who I do know, and who I think is a fair guy and a guy who is trying to get this right, and say to him, you have to do this. And you can't let any of the other 8 tell you no. Like you have to do it. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell Congress to do it. Because either way, you're going to have a public ethics code that you have to comply with and disclose to the public what you're earning outside of your income as a Supreme Court justice. because the public has a right to believe that they're getting all the information they need to assess whether you're for sale or not. And I don't think we've ever thought the court was for sale before. And the fact that some people think it now hurts our country because they got a lot of important decisions to make. That we need to count on the fact that they're making it based upon what their best judgment on the law is. There's always going to be disagreements among them, and that's fine. That's part of the check and balance. But if they don't disclose those things, it's a problem. And so that's what I would do. I would try to do it behind the scenes first to get him to do it so that they will all buy in. But I'll tell them, if not, then I'm going to go in my first State of the Union address and advocate for it. So, one way or the other, sir, decide what you want to do. I want to give them the chance to do the right thing. And if they're unwilling to do the right thing, then we'll have to impose the right thing on them because they're public servants too. They're not a king or a queen any more than the president is, or the Speaker of the House, or the majority leader of the Senate, right? So that's what we need to do, and that's the way I would handle it. And I hope that they would do it themselves. If they don't, then we're going to have to do it for them. But I'll give them a shot to do it themselves first, because I think the public would love to see that gesture by them, to be transparent in that way and not to be looking for loopholes about what not to report. Because then you look like you're on the take and you look like you're for sale. And then it diminishes the credibility of the court in a way that we don't need right now, given some of the things that are coming to this court, have come to it. And now we're going to have this whole constitutional question of Trump on the ballot is coming to them. We may have his presidential immunity claim that may come to them. Like, there's a lot of enormous decisions we need to count on their integrity to make in the right way. So I'm with you on that, and that's the way I would handle it if I was president. All right. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
If you're president and you receive intelligence that the Chinese are going to invade Taiwan, what do you do?
Well, first, I try to deter them from doing that. And I think the best way to do that is from the beginning, when I would get into office, I would work on rebuilding our Navy. Our Navy doesn't have nearly the number of ships we have and not anywhere near the number of submarines we need to have. And so I would build a third shipyard in this country that would start building those submarines and those ships, because that's the only thing that will intimidate the Chinese. If we have a big presence of especially nuclear subs in the South China Sea, they're going to understand. Like, I'll give you an example. Our nuclear submarines that we have there now, they're very quiet. China doesn't know where they are. And they can shoot 170 missiles at a time. I would just call Xi and say to him, look, let me just tell you, there's enough there to really lay waste to a good part of your country. You want to try me? Try me. But I'm a lot closer to you than you are to me because of that submarine capability. So I try to deter him. If he decided to do it anyway, then we'd have to go to war there. We cannot permit him to take Taiwan over for two reasons. One, because based on the answer I was giving back here before, we have friends that are counting on us to stand up for free people in this world. And if we don't, then everyone's going to head for the exits to be friends with America. Second, as a practical matter, 2/3 of the world's semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. You can't do anything anymore, anybody, without a semiconductor. You can't start your car without a semiconductor. You can't turn your heat on in your house without a semiconductor. And we all know those phones that we're slaves to are all with semiconductors, right? We do everything from those. Do we want the Chinese? He was talking, well, he's not there. But when he was there, he was talking to me about the natural minerals and what around the world that the Chinese take control of. They take control of the semiconductor manufacturing. We're in big trouble. So for those two reasons, I would absolutely enter into war with China over that. But I've got to do everything I can, both from a signal sending perspective and a practical perspective in terms of the building of ships and subs, to make them understand that the juice isn't worth the squeeze and leave it alone. But we've had a decade of weakness from Obama, Trump, and Biden. And that's why Putin's in Ukraine. That's why Hamas attacked Israel. And that's why Xi just said 2 weeks ago, we will reunify Taiwan. They're testing us because they know they've had some weak presidents in there. Look what happened. When Obama was there, they took Crimea away from Ukraine. Trump started to do the right thing in Ukraine, and then he started to trade weapons with Ukraine to get dirt on Joe Biden and got impeached for it. Then you got Biden, when he came into office, said, well, a small incursion probably wouldn't be bad. Well, what he found out was Putin describes small much different than he does. Right now we've got Russia and Ukraine. As soon as they saw that happening, it wasn't going as well as they thought, they had to set up a distraction somewhere else in the world. So Hamas comes in and invades Israel to distract America to the Israeli problem and away from the Ukrainian problem. And by the way, it's working. So if you're the Chinese right now and the only choices are Trump or Biden, you go, now's the time. Now it's time to make a move, because neither one of them are going to take us on. Trump because he's a coward, and Biden because I just don't know when he's all there most of the time. I just don't. I mean, and I don't mean that to be flippant, but I mean, just the stuff that's happened in the last 2 days. Like, you don't know your own defense secretary. He's in the hospital getting his prostate removed and is under anesthesia and has transferred power to the deputy. Like, it might be something you might want to know if you were president. And it tells me one of two things. Either he doesn't remember, or they shield him from things because he can't deal with it. Either one. If you're Xi in China, you're like, now's the time for me to move. And by the way, if China were better prepared militarily, I think they would have moved already. But, you know, I talked to the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff probably 2 months ago, and he said China knows that if they've gotten a war with us right now, they'd lose. But that may not be the case in 2 years or 3 years as they're building their military up. So we got to be ready to move. All right. We can take 2 more questions before I let you go out, as I see the snow continuing to pile up out there. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor Christie. What a pleasure to be here and to listen to your knowledge, your thoughtfulness, and some very key parts of what I'm sure would be your platform. I wonder if you could share with us maybe 4 or 5 just ideas of the principal things that would be on your platform for your first 2 years as a president.
Well, you heard a few of them already, right? The border issue would be the first thing that I would work on. Second, the rebuilding of our Navy, incredibly important. Third, let's talk about spending. Social Security, we talked about. So fourth, let's talk about spending. We're at $34 trillion in debt. It's incomprehensible that we are at that number. And so we have to work on lowering spending in this country, because not only is it putting our great-grandchildren now in debt, but it causes these interest rates to be as high as they are because we're crowding everybody else out of the credit market. And as a result, the interest rates go up because they can charge more because there's more of a demand for it, right? So on the spending side, I dealt with something akin to this in New Jersey when I came in. When I came in, we had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. And I had 5 months to fix it, because you have to have a balanced budget in the state, right? And our fiscal year ends June 30th. I got in January 19th, so I had 5 months. And I did 2 things. The first thing was I wound up impounding $2 billion worth of spending that had already been appropriated, because I said, it's a disaster, the budget's a disaster, and under the Disaster Control Act, I could take this spending back. The analogy to the federal side would be, we need to go back to pre-COVID levels of spending. We're still spending at the same level that we spent during COVID. I mean, COVID's over. I know some people are still getting it, but we don't have the people dying at the rate and being hospitalized at the rate that we did 3 years ago, 2 years ago. That would take $1 trillion off of the annual deficit. Right now, the deficit's like 1.7, 1.8 trillion. That would take $1 trillion off right away. I would do that first. Second, to get at the next 700 or 800 billion, I would go to zero-based budgeting, which is what I did in New Jersey. And what that is right now the way they do budgeting, well, they don't really do budgeting in Congress. They just keep passing continuing resolutions. But if they did budgeting, the way they would normally do it is you'd start at what you spent last year and see how much more you increase it. Zero-based budgeting says everybody comes in at zero. And now justify to me every program in your budget. I did that in New Jersey. It took me 3 meetings a week, 6 hours each meeting for 6 weeks to go through every line item in the budget. And we eliminated 832 programs by doing that and balanced the budget without raising taxes. And that kind of discipline is sustainable because in the 8 years before I became governor, the New Jersey budget went up 50% in 8 years. So about 6.5% a year every year. In the 8 years that I was governor, the budget went up total 15%. So less than 2% a year every year. As a result, we never had another deficit problem, and I left my successor with nearly $1 billion surplus when I left. It will take us every bit of 8 years of zero-based budgeting to get this under control. It will not happen in 4 years. It will take 8 because the numbers are just too big. But I think it can be done, and that's what we need to do. So that would be a priority. Freedom of choice in education. I would eliminate the Department of Education and take the $80 billion that we spend in the Department of Education every year and say to every state, if you give parents freedom of choice about where to send their kids to school, I will send you this money to help fund it, rather than having a big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., that all they do is send out money with huge strings attached to it. I think our public education system is failing, and the proof of that is 39% of our 8th graders this year could not read at grade level. 25% of our 8th graders couldn't do math at grade level. And we spend $400 billion a year on public education, K to 12, in this country between local, state, and federal tax revenue. We've got to do better than that. That would be a priority as well. And that would probably be more than enough for the first 2 years to get and bury myself into and see how much of that I could actually get done. But those would be the big priorities for me, because I think that's all about the future of the country: lowering debt, increasing our educational proficiency, protecting our borders, making sure our military is the best it can possibly be, and make sure we protect our seniors long-term to have the social safety net they need with Social Security, and the same rules would apply to Medicare. And that's what I would do with those. So those would be the top priorities. All right, we'll do one more and let you get out in the snow. Yes, ma'am, you're right here. Sorry about that.
I have 2 questions. The first one's about the Canadian border. And the second one is the challenge between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and the fact that today there was warning against the upper neutral countries. Because it's probably a little bit more intricate a situation than we have assumed would be just about the Arab nations.
All right, so let's start with the second part first. Look, on Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, everyone's going to have to stand up and be counted now on what's going to happen with Israel. There can be no neutral parties on this, because the question for our allies are, if we don't stand up for Israel to self-determine, how do we expect Israel to go and help the Palestinians, which needs to be part of the solution as well? That's why I would say to the Saudis, look, make peace with Israel and recognize their right to exist. Then we're going to get a Palestinian state after that. But if you're Israel and you just went through October 7th, and Hamas is saying they want more October 7ths going forward, and they don't have the Saudis as an ally of theirs in Israel. The Saudis are still nominally an enemy. How do we fix this problem? And the rest of the countries who all are like yelling for ceasefire in Israel, I've been there. I'm the only candidate who's gone to Israel since the war. And I could tell you from having been there that those people are legitimately frightened for their lives and their existence. And as the only democracy in the Middle East, we better stand firm, and we better say to our allies, this is a fight worth having. And by the way, the Israelis don't want anything other than financial or weapons support. They're not looking for American troops or any other troops to come there. They've got a sufficient army to win this thing if they're armed the right way. So, you look at what happened in Bethlehem at Christmas, where folks could not go there and make the pilgrims they normally made because of the war. You look at the holy places in Jerusalem and how really for the last 20 years, they've been managed pretty well with allowing people of all faiths Jewish, Christian, Muslim, to be able to come to the holy places in Jerusalem and be able to worship and do pilgrimages there. And Israel has made sure that it's been a place that's been open to everybody. That's what I remind all these folks of. And the fact that it wasn't the Saudis who made that happen. You know, it was the Israelis that made that happen. What was the first one again? I got so into that answer. Oh, the Canadian border. Okay, thank you. Well, Europe's position, as usual, on this stuff is ambiguous, right? And that's why we've fought so many wars in Europe. It's not okay, and that's why I said our allies it can't be neutral. They need to stand up, and they have not stood up. And the British have, but other than the British, the rest of the people in mainland Europe have been squishy at best, and worse in some respects. And this has got to be one of those test moments for us with our allies and say, like, you need to stand up. And quite frankly, when America really pushes, they can get that done because of the long-term relationships and the dependence on us. At 9/11, you didn't have any of them being squishy after 9/11. And because we made it clear, President Bush made it clear, there's only two choices. If you're a terrorist or you harbor terrorists or support them, you're just as much of an enemy. Well, everybody came around, so we do that. On the Canadian border, look, we have a great opportunity at the Canadian border to be able to avoid what's happening at the southern border, right? I mean, it is, I'm sure that even those of you here in New Hampshire who are a border state to the Canadian border, you're not waking up every morning worrying about what Trudeau's up to. And like, are the Canadians coming? We know they're not coming. But what we need to worry about is that we have a situation that's similar to what's happening at the southern border, which is people will begin to use that as an access point to the country, and that will significantly change. Well, and exit too. Now, here's the other part of it, though, is the challenge there and the opportunity are both much larger. The challenge is, you look at the southern border, presumably you could build a wall there. Now, we know that became a bit of a problem with the last ones. You can't build a wall on the northern border, okay? And so the fact of the matter is that we have to use technology and we have to use greater leverage with the Canadians to make sure that we're all in this game together before it gets bad like it's gotten with Mexico. And so that's where, when President Trump mocked Trudeau and, called him an infant and pretty boy and all the rest of this stuff, that's all like fun stuff for Trump, but it pisses Trudeau off and it makes him much less likely to cooperate with us in these things. We got to remember this is still a human business. And you're interacting with other human beings who have feelings and pride and ego and all the rest of it. We're not the only ones who own that. And so my strategy on the northern border would be, first off, my first two calls as president-elect would be to the president of Mexico and the president of Canada. And the reason for that is we live in the greatest neighborhood in the world. And they need to be acknowledged for that. And we don't do that. We take it for granted. We shouldn't take it for granted. And I would want to use that symbolic gesture as an opening to say to, if Trudeau's still the prime minister at that point, to say to him, look, Justin, I understand that you haven't treated with a whole great deal of respect by some of these folks. There's a new sheriff in town, and I want to be friends, and I want us to work together because we have common interest in making sure that our borders are secure and safe and that trade is uninterrupted between our two countries as a result. And I would do the same thing with Mexico. It'd be a harder deal in Mexico than in Canada, I suspect, but I think you have to focus on that. And, we also need to use our intelligence capabilities to determine what are the most vulnerable areas of the border and be using electronic technology and manpower where we need to try to secure those areas. We can't do the whole border. That's ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. Too big, too vast. But we can use intelligence capabilities that we have both here and in Canada to be able to make that determination. We share intelligence with the Canadians all the time and they with us. We should share that intelligence and then work with them to make sure either they or we are manning certain parts of the border to try to prevent what you're talking about, both in terms of entrance and exit. So that's the way I would deal with it. All right, so now here it is. We're in Rochester. It was snowing when I got here. It's still snowing, and it's starting to pile up a bit out there. And I didn't cancel. No, I did not cancel. We don't cancel. We do not cancel. As you can tell, I like talking too much. I got to cancel. Look, I'll end where I started, which is this is your call. Like, I don't want to hear any moaning or complaining from anybody in New Hampshire. You have an opportunity that no one else in the country except for Iowa kind of has, which is you're the presidential wine tasters of America. Like, you get to taste all of us. You get to see all of this close. I can guarantee you, once we get past, and South Carolina's not even as up close as all this is. You get past South Carolina, the only people that are gonna see us are people who are watching TV. No one's gonna see us like this. And certainly no one's gonna get to sit here for an hour and a half or 2 hours and ask questions. And so with that absolute privilege comes a responsibility. Don't just do what the media and the pundits are telling you is inevitable. Trump is not inevitable. He doesn't have to be, but only if you're going to stop him. You got to send the message. And I know, because I've been out here doing it now for months, it's hard because some of these Trump supporters are the loudest and the angriest. And it's hard sometimes to stand up. I tell the story all the time. I had a woman in Nashua. I was leaving a restaurant, and as I was walking by her table, she was a little woman that looked like she was in her 70s, and she grabbed my arm, and she said this, she goes, "Make sure you keep going after Trump. You need to stop him." And I said, "No problem, I will, but why are you whispering?" And she said, "Well, because my friends don't like to hear me say stuff like that." Like, it's time to stop the whispering, New Hampshire. Like 2 weeks from tonight, there can't be whispering. Because if there's whispering, he's going to be the nominee. And then your choice in November is going to be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. This is the greatest country the world's ever known. This is the greatest democracy in the history of the world. That's it? Really? I mean, you know the rest of the world's looking at us going, come on, they can't be serious. They can't possibly be serious. And worse, I think about Isabella. And I want her family to be able to point to the White House again and say, be like that person. Act like that person. Speak like that person. Feel like that person. Care like that person. Yes?
One more question.
This kid has been... Did you ever hand up and I didn't see you?
I did.
All right.
So my name's Charlie.
Charlie, how old are you?
9.
All right, let's go.
My question is about the future of like violence in America if you were to be president, and like what like you would try to do to prevent, like, let's say America being in like a major combat thing in like 8 to 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, because 8 to 10 years, it might be you having to go, Charlie. And so like all politics is local, isn't it? Look, I think the best way, Charlie, to stop a fight from starting is to let people you know that you're not afraid of one. And if there is one, that you'll be prepared to fight. So if you're on the schoolyard and there's a bully on the schoolyard and he's trying to bully you around and you stand up to him and say, like, I don't want to fight you, but if you fight me, you're going to get the worst end of it. And he looks at you and he knows that you're serious by the way you look and the way you act, that you don't want to fight, but if he's going to take a swing at you, you're going to be ready to fight back and to win. I think that's the best way to avoid violence and avoid us being in a big conflict around the world where we'd have to send people like you to go and fight it and risk your life. And I think the hardest thing a president ever has to do is to make that decision. And everything that you do should be to let people know we will stand up for what we believe in and we are prepared to fight, but we would rather shake your hand. We would rather be your friend than be your enemy. We would rather see you do well and us do well. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Everybody can do well if we work with each other and we cooperate with each other. And I think those are the things that a president needs to be saying and preparing for to be able to avoid a war like that. And so I understand that especially as you're growing up, looking at the world the way it is right now and how angry people are and the stuff you see in Europe and the stuff you see in Israel, that if I were 9, I'd be thinking like, can't you guys get it together? Right? Like, why are you all fighting like that? Yeah. Right? And you say like, this should be, adults should act like adults. Might be nice, right, Charlie? And definitely, right? So as president, that's what I would try to do. And it doesn't mean that we never have a problem, but it makes it much less likely that we do. When people know you're serious, that you'll stand up for what's right, but that you'd rather work with them, cooperate with them, and make everybody's life better. I think that's the best chance you have to not having a war like that, not having to see somebody like you go over and fight something like that, because I'd prefer that not to happen. Thanks, Charlie. Sorry I missed you. So that's a really good way to end. Right before I got into the race, I called President Bush 43, and I asked him about whether I should get into this race or not. I worked for him. I was the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. He appointed me. And he said to me, you should get in. No one's saying what you're saying. Get in. Fight. And he said, now remember, when you go to New Hampshire, he said, make sure when you're at those town hall meetings, you ask people for the vote. Now, I know you think that they know you want their vote. And he said, but people, you know, they're sensitive about their vote. And if you don't ask them for it, they may think you're not respectful enough of their vote. So ask for the vote. Don't forget to ask for the vote. I said, absolutely, Mr. President. He goes, you hear me? Ask for the vote. I'm like, yes, sir. I got it. I said, thanks for the advice, Mr. President. And he said, yeah, who would listen to me anyway? I only won it twice. And so I want to make sure I do that to honor my friend and the person who got me in this business in the first place, President Bush 43. I want your vote. I need your vote, need your support to be able to keep this going. I want to stand up to Donald Trump, and that's what I've been doing every day of this campaign. And it has at times been a lonely adventure. But the reason that I don't feel completely lonely is because of folks like you, who when I start to say these things, look at me and smile and nod. Like, you get it. Well, now I need not only your vote, but I need you to talk to all those friends of yours and colleagues and relatives and neighbors who are all trying to decide now what to do. And they got a chance to make that choice in 2 weeks. So in these 2 weeks, we got to make sure you're talking to everybody, whoever you're going to vote for. Like, look, I want you to vote for me, obviously, but even if you're going to vote for one of the other folks, get out there and make sure you do, and make sure you advocate for the person you believe the most in. Because only if we get everybody participating and doing this do we get a situation where we get something better than what we're being offered right now. And that's the most important thing to me, because we do have 4 children who are older now than when I came here the last time. But even though they're 30 and 27 and 23 and 20, they still, God willing, have the majority of their lives ahead of them. And I want this to be the great country that it's been for me for most of my life, and giving me these opportunities to be the great-grandson of the guy who got on the boat as a Mason that came over and helped build New York. And amazingly, the grandson of a guy who was born on the boat. If my grandfather were alive today, he would not believe this, that a guy who was made an American citizen when he was 4 days old came over here at that age with parents who couldn't speak the language, that his grandson is getting a chance to run for president of the United States. That's what this country is all about. That's why she should have hope. That's why he shouldn't be worried, because that's what this country has always provided. Let's not give that up to a royal family. It's not what we wanted 250 years ago when we started. It's sure as heck not what we should settle for now. So as long as I think I got a chance to win this thing, I'm going to fight every day to try to win it. And with your help 2 weeks from tonight, we could shock the world. And if we do that, then I'm going to be the next president of the United States. And we're going to do the things in those first 2 years that I talked to you about. And different than other candidates, I love doing town hall meetings. I did 150 of them in my first 4 years as governor. And I'm going to keep doing them when I'm president, because that's the way you find out what people really think, when you give them the opportunity to talk to you up close. And so we'll keep doing that. You give me the honor to be your president. I'll be your president, not anybody else's. And I appreciate you coming tonight very much, and drive home safely.